Greetings Mzansi, Africa. My name is Daphne Naidoo. I'm the Provincial Program Head within the Gauteng Department of Social Development, responsible for adoption services. I'm going to be talking to adoption services, streamlining into adoption services, but broadly, touching into child protection. When children are found in need of care and protection, generally, and in most cases, we cannot and we are not able to return those children back into their families. As a result, we place those children within the child protection system and in alternative care. Now, alternative care can be seen as your children's home, foster care, and ultimately also adoption. Now, what is the difference between these placements? When it comes to foster care and your children's homes, those are not your permanent placement. Those are usually being extended by the children's court. You have a designated social worker that monitors and supervises those placement. The placement, even if you're in foster care, even with families, that foster parent doesn't have full parental rights and responsibilities over the child. You may not have guardianship over the child, and so forth. Unlike adoption. And therefore, when you look at adoption and you ask yourself, what is adoption? And why one should consider adoption, as an option for wanting a child. Now, adoption is when we have a placement of a child into a permanent care of a person or persons. In other words, this child would have the same legal status of that of a biological family. That is adoption. It's a permanent placement of that person within a family or to a person or persons for that matter. Now, when you think about adoption services, we have two types of adoption services that we generally talk about. We have national and inter-country adoptions. Now, national means within the country, and inter-country means you could adopt a child from outside, or a child from South Africa can be adopted from another country. Now, I know this is a lot to take in, but I'm talking to people that generally want a job within the country. When you look at national adoptions, we talk about also related and unrelated adoptions for that matter. And what is related? Related, just by the word related, means that the prospective adoptive parents knows that child, or the biological parent or parents of that child, or the child and the biological parents know the prospective adoptive parents for that matter. And unrelated when the parties don't know each another. So you're having those two types of adoption. Further to that, we have, one needs to ask, who renders these adoption services? There's three types of people that render these adoption services. We have social workers that comes from within the Department of Social Development. We have social workers that are employed within the child protection organizations, and we have private adoption social workers. However, all these three adoption social workers should be accredited or registered with the South Africa, should be accredited by the department, the National Department of Social Development, and also they get registered with the South African Council for Social Services Professionals, which is a statutory body who is an oversight to make sure that adoption takes place the correct way that it should. It's a very legislated environment, and so we want to make sure that the placement of the child, takes place in accordance with the law, because it is a permanent placement for that matter. Now, one of the things that we need to ask is, a lot of questions is asked all the time. But adoption is so expensive. How do we, what is the amount paid for adoption? How do you, pay? Must you pay? Now, the good news is, since 2018, previously, for some odd reason, Department of Social Development social workers were not rendering adoption services, but there's been changes to legislation. That's a great news for this country. Since 2018, the Department of Social Development could render and can render adoption services without a cost. While our child protection organizations that are accredited, do charge, and there is a cost to it, and it could be on a sliding scale as well. So, it could be, anything between up to 10,000, and even sometimes we've seen some of them charge up to 20, depending on what, on the different services that they may render. And then you have your private adoption social workers that charges a fee for adoption as well, and it could vary as well in terms of the adoption, and I know it can be costly. But the good news to South Africans is that we have a Department of Social Development that renders the adoption services free of charge. But then I've also seen, some other TikTokers that's on this line or Facebook or so forth and said, but no, we've been to government and we charged, there was a cost to it, it's not totally free. Okay, let's explain what may be the cost. There are certain things that is required when we do adoption. We probably want to have a health assessment done by a doctor. Now, some of them will prefer for it to be done by a private doctor or private hospital. Certainly that comes at a cost. You're more than welcome to go to a government hospital to get a public doctor to do that assessment, but some of them, because of time and because of the thoroughness of the assessment, would want to prefer a private doctor. So if you're preferring a private doctor, then it's going to come with a cost. So therefore, some of them do pay for it, and that's where the cost comes in. But generally, there is no cost by government. Now, when you talk about adoption, and then we also need to look at further, there are two types of adoption as well that we talk about, which is an opened and a closed adoption. Now, an open adoption is whereby, there could be biological parent or parent, like just the mother. And she could say, look, it's a tough decision. It means somebody wants to give up a child generally, for those that doesn't abandon children for that matter. So if you want to give up your child, it's difficult. And maybe it's, with families, you want other family members to take care of your child because you can't take care of the child for whatever reason, and you feel permanency placement of the child is very important. So there's identity. Now, you want an open adoption. So an open adoption is where the biological parent to say, yes, I want to give up my child for adoption. However, there's conditions to that adoption. I want visitation rights at a certain period. I want photos. I want communication. It's very structured. And then we have a post-adoption agreement that usually takes place. It's obviously that's ordered by court. So it's not something nilly-willy. It's an agreement. It's something that you can agree on. So it's nothing to be scared about. If you are looking for an open adoption and you are fine with an open adoption, it's also need to look at the best interests of the child in that sense. However, that biological mother relinquishes all other rights to the child. You agree what are the conditions for this adoption, and usually it's a post-adoption agreement, which is then ordered by the court after the adoption has been concluded or part of the adoption process. A closed adoption is when you say, oh no, wait a minute, I don't want to have any contact with the biological parent or parents. I don't want the child to have any contact. You have that right as well. There are adoptions like that we could ensure that happens, which means, and this is what you need to be aware of. Generally, if it is your own child, when your child enters 18, you lose parental rights and responsibilities over that child. So once a person entered 18 in this country, that person is said to be a major. That age has been brought down from 21 to 18 years. So when you are 18, us as parents, for that matter, we lose parental rights and responsibilities over our children. So once that person enters 18, that child that is your child, that person can make a decision to get in contact with a biological parent, or even biological parents and families. Once the child they know have entered 18, they can say, I would want to make contact. Remember, that's an adult now, and that person can make decisions. So that's what you need to also be aware of. So how do you make contact? They can phone and contact the National Department of Social Development, who keeps records of every adoption that happens in this country, so that we give information thereafter. But obviously, both parties must agree, the child and the biological parents or families of that child, or now as an adult, needs to agree to wanting to have contact. Because if one party says no, then there's no contact that's going to be made. So I think as the adoptive parents, prospective adoptive parents, you need to be aware of this, because that could be a possibility. And remember, we don't have control once our children become adults, even though it's still our child. I think it's very important when we look at who then can adopt in South Africa. Look, not everybody can adopt. And when we think about, firstly, the criteria that is used for adoption. Firstly, when we look at national adoption, you should have permanent residence or have citizenship in the country. That when we deal with national adoptions. But say you don't have those two, and you do have the child or even yourself that is physically in this country, we may deal with a national adoption but with an inter-country element as well, or we may just deal with it from an inter-country point of view, and we'll use the A Convention on adoption, which is another legislative piece of law that talks to how children get adopted, outside the country, or you're having citizens from outside the country, from other countries that wants to adopt. This is how we will use that piece of legislation to inform the procedure and process and the legal, within the legal course of the adoption of that child. Now, when you look at adoption, it's very important to understand who are these people. Can I adopt? What makes me be more prone to adopt than the other person? So we look at a child may be adopted jointly by a husband and wife, so that's good news, by partners in a permanent life, domestic life partnership, by any other person who shares a common household or forming a permanent family, by a widower, by a widow. So even if you lost your spouses, you can adopt. By a divorced person, you can adopt. By an unmarried person, you certainly can adopt. By a married person whose spouse is the parent of a child. So if you are married and that may be your stepchild, you can adopt. By a person who's having permanent domestic life partner and that parent is having a child, even in your life partnership, and that person has a child, you can adopt that child. By the biological father of the child born out of wedlock. Now, this is very important, and I want to pause there because I want to just give you some information. Because fathers and mothers, sometimes you don't get married, right, for whatever reason, and you have a child, and the mother can be really nasty in a sense to say, no, I'm not identifying you, and maybe she didn't put you as a father when the child was registered, at Home Affairs. At the birth and death, of the child, okay, in terms of the Birth and Death Registration Act. But you want to play your role as a father, and you feel that I would want to then adopt the child. You're most welcome to say you can go through adoption if the child is born out of wedlock, or alternatively, you got other ways of gaining access to your child. You can go to court and gain parental rights and responsibilities over the child. You can do a DNA test, say that you're the father, you want to step up, and the court always looks at the best interest of the child. And this is very important as well, that the best interest of the child supersedes everybody else's interest. So it supersedes the biological parents, it supersedes family members, it supersedes prospective adoptive parents. So we are finding families for a child and not a child for a family, and that is very important that you need to be aware of as well. So that is when we just talk to biological fathers when their children are born out of wedlock. The other aspect is when children are placed in foster care, those foster parents are also given preference over the child as well. Not to say it's a must, but it's something that one will consider. Extended family members, once a child become adoptable and declared adoptable, you also have the right to approach the courts and say that you would want to have preference over adoption of the child. So family members, extended family members and so forth, if you're aware that a certain family child within your family becomes available for adoption, you can certainly approach the courts and say you would love for this child to be adopted. Now, one needs to understand that when you talk about adoption, and we're talking about the permanent placement of somebody, and usually generally children, and especially babies, because everybody wants young, cute little babies to adopt, and so somebody's making a life decision on this child, a decision that will impact on this child's life forever. So it's not a quick process, and that's what you need to understand as well. Why? Because there's a lot of assessments that takes place, especially with the prospective adoptive parents. We want to make sure that we get the right parents for that child. Prospective adoptive parents got to be fit and proper. And when we make that determination, what is fit and proper? In other words, you must be capable and able to have parental rights, or to undertake the parental rights and responsibilities of this child, the daily care. It's not a quick kind of thing where people think it's so lovely to have a child when it's birthday parties, we can have fun, or there's nice days or whatever, but there's going to be bad days as well. So we must know that you are willing and capable when the days are not good, when this child turns into a teenager, and you know how monstrous teenagers can be at times as well. So you've got to deal with those aspects. So we want to make sure that the lifespan of this person within your care is that person is going to be taken care of, that you are ideal to take care of this child. So like we said, we're finding a family for this child and not a child for the family. Now, obviously, you've got to be over 18 if you're wanting to adopt as well, and we also vet you again certain registers in this country: the Sexual Offences Register, the police clearance certificates, the Child Protection Register. So you can't be somebody whose names appear there and you have serious criminal records and so forth, because those are the things we are going to analyze. And unfortunately, that's what it is. We need to look at the care and protection, and most important, to the right of safety protection of this child. And that's why we as social workers, and it is a tedious way of getting the permanency to place this child in your care. So you need to understand from that perspective, because you could be ideal. So maybe nothing's wrong with you as a prospective adoptive parent, but you need to understand there could be other prospective adoptive parents that's not ideal. And if you're going to just nilly-willy just place children, not do a proper job in terms of assessment, evaluation, and due diligence around providing the legislative services, then we compromise the child in the process. And the child is relying on us, the professionals in this field, to do the right thing for that child. So please understand from that perspective. But at the same time, it depends on the situation and circumstances of the child. We may consider placing the child in temporary safe care, within your family with an order. So everything that we do as the social workers got to be made sure that it is comes up via orders by the children's court. Very important, you need to consider is, in South Africa, we're so diverse, and that's a great thing about our country. We're diverse and we're very caring. We have the sense of Ubuntu amongst all our cultures, and we want to give back, and we are caring people. So let's look at when the child is, you ask yourself, but wait a minute, it was such a long road, especially interracial. Okay, why is it so difficult to have an interracial adoption? So let me be honest with you that a child's rights, like I said to you, is of paramount importance. So a child's right to his or her own culture, race, community, family, and so forth, takes precedent over the family's or anyone else's needs. So this child, firstly, we will look at that option. But we do know we may not find somebody, having the same traits, maybe a race, or maybe a culture, or maybe a religion. Nothing stops us from then looking outside, but we must first consider these aspects first, in terms of if there's nothing there, then we can look at other. So understand it from that perspective. And also, we won't disqualify you because of your financial, circumstances, because finance, yes, it's important, but it's not ultimate and it's not the most defining, because we do have social grants in this country that can assist from a financial point of view as well. But children that gets adopted do not get a grant. There's no adoption grant. But we do give you, if you're in foster care, you may get a foster care grant, but you have access to child support grant, or the child support top-up grant, and so forth. So that's a different aspect altogether. But please note, doesn't mean that you adopt a child. It means that now you will be financially, a government will be giving you a grant because you adopted the child. There's no grant linked to adoption. So that you need to be also fully aware of. So the question is now, why must you consider to adopt? Because we are people, because we care, because we want to do good, because a child makes up a family between a couple, because we want to make sure that, you know, we have a sense of Ubuntu within our country. So just to say that, you know, it's not an easy road. You have these three options. And like I said, you can approach the Department of Social Development. You can approach a child protection organization. You can approach a private social worker. You know, you get assessed as a prospective adoptive parents. Also understand there are no children readily available for adoption. You know, lots of us want to pick and choose. You're not in a supermarket where there's ready-made groceries there for you to pick what you want, or the nice food that you want. Because we do have preferences. Maybe we can say we want our own race, or a certain color in terms of the eyes, or, you know, those are things those are your wants, but it doesn't mean it is a must. We can consider that when we're doing matching and placement of a child, but you need to be open as well. You know, what is your intention? What is it that you want to achieve for yourself and your family? So in that sense, you know, you may not get the ideal. And what is very important is there's no comebacks in adoption. Like I said to you up front, adoption is a permanent placement. So please understand that this child becomes your child. So later on, when the child turns a teenager, there's no come back and say to us, you know what, government, take your child, I adopted this child and so forth, I want to give back this child. So unfortunately, there's no comebacks and givebacks at that stage. So you're going to deal with this child as if it's your own. Once there's a court order, it then becomes, you know, registered. It's by law that this child is given to you. You go to Home Affairs, that child's surname changes to yours, and all records at Home Affairs is then taken out of the biological parent, and you are seen as the parent and guardian of this child. So Mzansi, this is so important for you to understand, is that we as a nation need to start doing the right thing. If we adopt each child, we should be having no children that does not have a family. Because we care, we shall and we must support each another. So please adopt and go to your nearest DSD, CPO, or private social workers when you want to consider adoption. Thank you.